On the morning of July 18th, 1870, in a thunderstorm so violent the bishops inside St. Peter's Basilica could barely hear the words being read aloud, the Catholic Church declared the Pope of Rome to be infallible. 2 months later, almost to the day, Italian troops blew a hole in the wall of Rome, and the 1,000-year-old Papal States ceased to exist. This is the story of how one of the Church's most controversial dogmas was proclaimed in the exact moment the Pope lost his earthly kingdom.
Okay, a little explanation. A little explanation. I moved my studio, and my new studio's in progress of being set up. So my son had these like things on the wall that he used to keep his records on, and I had to find books that were thin enough. So I'm like, all right, I got a couple St. Anthony's books here. I got the Baltimore Catechism. That's what's going up. But I do have like a really nice Avoiding Babylon sign coming, and this studio arrangement is going to be set up differently. And by the next time I do a show, Rob, you're going away, right?
I am tomorrow.
When do you get back?
Next Tuesday night.
Do you
think I won't be on the show Tuesday night? I'll be driving still, but
do you think we could do the series on Thursday next week?
Yes.
So instead of doing it, so next week's going to be a little bit of a change up. We're going to do it Thursday next week, and I'm going to possibly get Father Amato on Thursday night. Rob will be away. It'll just be me. I'm going to possibly get Father Amato for Thursday. If he can't make it, I may just do a solo show and just have a locals call in and just like people from locals come on or something. We'll figure that out. And then next Tuesday, while you're away, I think I'm going to get Catholic State on to discuss the Benedictine College thing that happened.
Okay.
And also do some JQ stuff. So that's the plan going forward. This episode, man, it made me want to go back and do the Council of Trent.
Yeah, we might, there's a lot of things we could do once we kind of finish the arc we're on. We could
get up to the council maybe and then backtrack some, right?
Right. Or that would be one option. Another option would be we're seeing how Rome responded to all of these historical things we're talking about, right? It would be interesting to see how different peoples or different nations responded to them, right? Just Spain, how it responded to the Napoleonic wars and the French Revolution were 3 wars during the 1800s called the Carlist Wars that created a traditional sort of movement that was still around during the Spanish Civil War, and that provided a lot of forces to the nationalist side in that war. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff we could do.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to earlier popes. I want to go to Pope Gelasius. I picked the clip. You want to?
I think the problem's going to be with that is that we don't have near the amount of writing from previous popes.
Right.
One, because encyclicals didn't really exist, and 2, they're just earlier in history, obviously.
Well, the other thing is this whole lead up to Vatican I. I think in hindsight, we all look at it, and especially because of the whole Sedevacantists conversation that's going on, people maybe in the modern day think that the Pope is reacting to something in the to things in the church, which he is, don't get me wrong, but so much of this is about the conflict between church and state.
Yeah.
And it's you going in and doing the research for this is when it really starts to hit home that, us quoting something from Vatican I to to a modernist or to a trad or something like it wasn't written for that argument. The argument was written in a completely different context, and it kind of gets rewired for the modern arguments, but it just doesn't make sense in a lot of cases. But I threw in one clip, the conflict between church and state from the 5th century, Rob. I want just to see how far back this conflict goes, because it's always been the problem. And the thing is, the church, especially in those early centuries, the church really saw the prophecies in Daniel about the Nebuchadnezzar's dream with the statue at the head of gold, the chest of silver, the bronze, and the legs of iron, and then the legs of iron and clay that crumble and become a mountain. They saw that as the Babylonian Empire, then the Persian Empire, then the Greek Empire, then the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire crumbles and covers the earth. And they see the Roman Empire then becoming Christian and covering the earth. And they have this real sense of there's one empire and it must cover the earth. And that's the dream of Christendom that kind of falls apart after the fall of Rome. And and they reworked their theology to understand it differently and through subsidiarity and things like that. But that really is the emphasis in those early centuries of Christianity. So just play that clip real quick, because it kind of gets into that a little bit.
Many of the popes came from senatorial families, the born to lead civil servants of empire. Popes would not dare ascend St. Peter's throne without having their election ratified and approved by the emperor. This was the age-old custom. They continued to believe that
I don't know if that's true.
In the early centuries, this is Constantine era.
Yeah.
That might be that. Maybe that one particular thing, but listen to where it goes.
Secular glory of Rome was part of God's providential ordering of the world. They stuck firm to the old religious doctrines, the truths of Peter about God, the Trinity, and the nature of Christ. Nothing can be changed unless it is handed down. Nothing can be changed. Nothing should be changed. This was still Rome, but it was old Rome. Everything had changed. There was now a new Rome. The political center of the empire was now in the east. The new Rome was Constantinople. By the end of the 5th century, the emperor was making increasing claims to authority over the church. Pope Gelasius, Roman-born, would have none of it. There are two powers by which this world is ruled: the sacred authority of bishops and the royal power. Of these, the responsibility of the bishops carries most weight.
So that is the argument that starts getting set up in those early centuries, and there's this constant battle between the temporal rulers and the Pope and the Church, and it kind of plays out throughout the centuries. And what we're dealing with in Vatican I is more of that.
Yep.
That figuring out, okay, because what I never really put together was that how much backlash Pius got from the Marian dogmas. Like people really were like, whoa, what is this? What are you talking about? Because he basically said that you had to believe it as an article of faith, essentially, that if you don't believe Mary is the Immaculate Conception, you can't be Catholic. So it raised all these debates.
If he got a lot of pushback from that.
Maybe not within the church. I'm talking about from the outside circles. That's from everything I was checking out. That's what I was getting from it. So
he definitely got more pushback for the syllabus than he did about the Immaculate Conception.
Oh yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so where are you gonna start us off with the history portion?
Well,
tonight?
before we do that, I want to hear if you got another new knickknack advert.
You know, I don't have a story this week, but you and I were actually talking about it, and we wanted to know if any of you out there have any miraculous knickknack conversion stories.
Oh my gosh.
And if anybody, first off, I am so cooked from being on the boat this weekend. I have never been this red. If anybody has a story of radical transformation from taking the miraculous knickknacks, please send them in. You could be in video form, it could be in written form, and we can highlight it on the show. But we've highlighted two people so far. Our friend Bob, who went from being an incel to having so much game that his woman can't get enough of him. We also discussed Jim, our friend Jim. Jim was a total loser, and he is now a fashion influencer. So if you have taken knickknacks and it has transformed your life, we would love to hear your story. Knickknacks, they will transform your life.
They do contain nicotine, and the nicotine is an addictive substance.
Addictive substance.
I am taking one of these every day instead of eating lunch. So
that's knickknacks help you fast.
Yeah.
All right, so go to knickknack.com, use code AB 25% off your first purchase to get 25% off, and all subsequent purchases use AB10 for 10% off everything after that. Black Monk rosaries. Man, I can't get enough of Black Monk rosaries. I pray my Black Monk rosary every morning in my truck. It is the extent of my prayer life these days, and I thank God that I have that heavy-duty rosary that will not break. Black Monk rosaries, get 10% off an amazing Black Monk rosary by going to blackmonkrosary.com. Use code Avoiding Babylon at checkout, and you will get 10% off. Bob is the man now. Get knickknacks and get a wife. That is the slogan. You know what? We could talk about I have some things on locals tonight. I kind of want to talk about the Wagner thing.
I've done my best to avoid that.
I want to kind of talk about the Wagner thing because we'll do it on locals. I don't want anybody to think I'm trashing Wagner in any way. It's more just the conversation online is so strange to me. Just
yeah,
like the way people are like handling the certain topics. It's definitely a locals conversation. Yeah, the kissing question, and then other people talking about what that it's not a sin to be with your wife. Like it's such a bizarre conversation happening. I want to do that. We got to do a Chud the Builder update because man, the timing on my video. Come on. I know it was a pretty predictable scenario. It's not like I was Nostradamus or anything, but
do a video like 4 days before it happened.
The timing of that video. So there's an update. Chud the Builder's lawyer released a statement, and I'd like to jump into that. And there's also the Department of Justice is doing a 15-city nationwide anti-Semitism awareness tour. So we'll discuss that also. So that's what's in store for locals. So all right, we got the announcements out of the way. So where do you want to take us tonight, Rob?
Okay. So if you watch the first two episodes, you basically know how we got here. But if you haven't, I'll just summarize it real quick. So 1832, Gregory VII is basically looking at the wreckage of the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, the upheavals in 1830, and he's looking at the devastation left by liberal priests within the church, who were trying to more or less baptize this new liberal secular order, and he answered all that with Morari Vas. Then in 1864, Pius IX, who we called the once liberal Pope, he had watched his own prime minister get murdered in 1848 on the steps of his own palace. He issues Quanta Cura in the Syllabus of Errors, and he condemns 80 propositions of the modern world by name. And so basically after those two popes, well, this is still within Pius IX, but after those things, the world responds basically as you would have expected. All the secular forces in Europe, they didn't try to engage the arguments or debate the theology. They basically just started mocking the Pope, legislating against the church, closing monasteries, seizing church property. And they kept quietly and methodically dismantling the Papal States, basically one region at a time. So by 1864, which is by 1864, that's when he issues Quanta Cur and the Syllabus of Errors. He rules almost nothing by that point, Pius IX. By 1868, he basically had just the city of Rome itself. And even that he only had because France had a garrison of troops inside of it, protecting it from the new Kingdom of Italy. And basically, the question that was hanging over Europe right at that point wasn't, whether or not the Pope would lose the rest of the Papal States, basically the city of Rome. The question was when it was going to happen. So that's basically where we're at when Pius IX decides to call an ecumenical council.
Now, what year is the council called?
It's called in 1868. Like that's when he calls it, but it doesn't really happen until 1870.
Yeah, he starts like planning this earlier on, right? And there's the other thing I was looking into was the rivalry between Manning and Newman is a really interesting one too. Like I thought they were just kind of like cordial adversaries, like like they're just taking different sides of the argument. There was some real tension between those two guys, which is kind of interesting going into this debate that happens at this council and the way things pan out. But so
you might know more about you might know more about their rivalry. I just know about like their what they were arguing and the different sides they were on of the issue. So once we get to that, once we're talking about that, you might have to step in there.
Yeah. Because I did a little looking into them because I've never really read Newman, but I have read Cardinal Manning, and I'm more of a Manning guy. And the more I look into it, what's interesting, well, we'll get into it when we get over there because it's actually I think there's a reason why I'm attracted more to him than Newman. So we'll get to that at that point.
Okay, so why did Pius IX call a council? So on June 29th, 1868, which is the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, Pius IX did something that no pope had done for 300 years, basically, at that point. He convokes an ecumenical council, and it's the first council since Trent had closed in 1563. So it's 305 years.
This is a big deal, right? Like it's been 300 years, and the way that they
the longest period without an ecumenical council.
And the way they talk about Trent in Vatican I is just like the
time after time after time. Yeah.
That's why I want to go back and maybe take a better look at Trent because Mike, I have such a cursory knowledge of it. It's like, oh, the Reformation happened, and then they called a council to squash out justification. Like that's the extent of my understanding of Trent, and I really kind of think there's probably way more meat to get into in that period.
I think if we were to look at the historical context, not just of like the Reformation, but like why the Reformation happened then and not in previous times, I think we would see that the conflict of state versus church, especially of Christian state versus Christian church, really maybe doesn't start with the Reformation in Trent, but I think you could draw a pretty straight line from there to Vatican I. Like,
yeah.
So I think that would be interesting to do.
The other thing that I never, I goof around about the Irish a lot, but to the extent at which the Irish repelled Protestantism with Catholic England constantly pressuring them, like Catholic Ireland, they held their own for a long time, man. They crumble after the council.
400 years, basically, yeah, right?
Of just constant pressure from England, and they held their own, man. It's we definitely have to get back into that period. Yeah. So, all right, go ahead.
Okay, so the council that is convened has a pretty straightforward mandate at the outset. It's called basically to address the errors of the modern age. The council was called to define what the church believed about faith, reason, revelation, and the authority of the Holy See in a world that really didn't, any longer recognize any of those things at all. But beneath the surface, there was definitely more going on. Pius IX was basically calling a council because the syllabus of errors hadn't seemed to be enough. An encyclical, even one that contains the syllabus of errors, it can be argued with, right? It can be dismissed as just one pope's opinion. But a solemn decree of an ecumenical council with bishops from all over the world gathered in union with the successor of Peter, that carries a really a different kind of weight. A weight that's really truly binding. And Pius IX, at this point, he's no longer just trying to teach the modern world anymore through an encyclical. He's really trying to bind the modern world and the modern church by using an ecumenical council. But before the church has to fight against the rest of the modern world, part of this council is really about settling a war that had been simmering inside the church for about 200 years at this point. And on one side of that war, you had the Gallicans, and that name comes from Gaul, the old name for France. And so what happened, how that started in 1682 under Louis XIV. And Louis XIV is like, when you think of an absolute monarch, Louis XIV is like the stereotype of that. He's called the Sun King. And absolute monarchy was not really, it wasn't a Catholic invention, it was a Protestant invention, right? Under Henry VIII, but you had France and other Catholic monarchs eventually adopt absolute monarchy so they could increase their own power. So Louis XIV is an absolute monarch in the worst sense of the word. And in 1682, he signs what are called the Gallican Articles. And basically, these documents more or less say that the Pope's authority stops at the border of France when it comes to civil and secular matters. The articles declare that the Pope's authority is subject to the decisions of an ecumenical council, so kind of put the Pope under the authority of councils. The documents declare that the exercise of papal authority must be regulated by the canons of the church, and that the Pope must respect the customs of local churches, like of national churches. Finally, the articles, the Gallican Articles said that even in matters of faith, the Pope's decisions and teachings were not irreformable unless they were confirmed by the consent of the universal church. Let me go down here. And this wasn't really a fringe position necessarily.
Yeah.
So, because for 2 centuries, like from that up until Vatican I, Gallicanism was, even if it wasn't always French in nature, Gallicanism was the default assumption of basically most of like the Catholic nations in Europe. Different Catholic.
Just for the passing, the length of time information takes to travel alone. Right, you think about it, like the Pope makes a decree in Rome. By the time that information even gets to the outside church, there was way more autonomy in amongst local bishops. Like it's an anomaly, the situation in the church of the modern era, where the Pope said, like we see every single thing the Pope does, and we know exactly what's going on in Rome. This is insane to consider that in this time period. The telegraph is just being invented,
Yeah, one of my this comment says poor Bossuet got swept up in Gallicanism. Bishop Bossuet is I've done his Advent and Lent and meditations on the channel. Really, really good stuff. But he was a Gallican.
Yeah.
And otherwise was a very solid bishop, solid Catholic. So Gallicanism is not fringe at this point. The kings loved it, national governments loved it. That sort of theology lets them control the church inside their borders, while still being, at least nominally Catholic.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of the controversy were the Ultramontanes. And Ultramontanism, it means beyond the mountains, which those mountains they're the Alps.
The Swiss Alps, right?
Yeah. So, to the rest of Europe, Italy and Rome they were beyond the Alps. So
Yeah.
to be ultramontane was to be loyal to Rome. And they argued the opposite of everything of what Gallicanism stood for. So they said that the Pope holds universal, immediate, and supreme jurisdiction over the entire church. The Pope's not just a first among equals. He's not just a referee among bishops. So they really saw that the Pope was the visible head of the church with real authority, and had that exercised that real authority over every baptized Catholic on the planet. So why does this matter? Why does this fight? Why does this controversy matter in 1869? Well, the secular forces in Europe were tearing down the Papal States. The revolutionaries, nationalists, and liberal governments of Italy, France, and Prussia, they're all counting on Gallicanism. Basically, they're counting on a church that could be carved up, nationalized, and controlled by these different nations. They basically envisioned a neutered church where every nation had its own little pseudo pope, and the man in Rome was just a figurehead. So Vatican I, part of what Vatican I was called for was to settle that question forever. Now we're going to start getting into Manning and Newman. So
yeah, well, the interesting thing about Manning and Newman,
this is a good question.
Do you see? Pull that up. Yeah. Do you see connections between Gallicanism and Americanism? Is the latter downstream of the former? Well, go ahead. You jump at that.
Yes and no. Americanism doesn't necessarily say the American president should control the church or things of that nature. But it is saying that we should compromise our Catholic faith, our Catholic beliefs, in order to basically go along to get along, right? That we should put that we should put our American identity before our Catholic identity. So in that sense, it's definitely downstream of Gallicanism, I would say.
Yeah, what's happening in this council is going to actually set up the big debate in the church for the 20th century. And you're going to have some, especially in South America, because at this time, South American countries are they're just starting to develop their,
Nothing.
Did I miss something?
No, why?
Oh, I thought you said something. The South American countries are just developing their Catholic identity down there, and down there they're way more ultramontane than they are in Europe. Europe is having this revolt against the papacy, but it really kind of does set up the battles going forward in the centuries preceding it. So, but between Manning and Newman, what I found really interesting, especially in the conversation we had recently on this show, is Newman is kind of seen as this highly intellectual Catholicism that's in the universities and stuff like that. And Manning is fighting for a more middle class, lower class educational system, while Manning is fighting for the university system. And it's kind of pitting this high intellectual Catholicism versus cultural Catholicism in a way. And it's interesting because they're both converts.
They're both English converts.
They're both English converts set in England 10 years after they even allow Catholicism to be legal in England. So it's these two figures are such interesting characters when you get into them.
Yeah. And I'd actually never heard of Manning before you recently started reading him.
Me.
So Newman is the one you always hear about. Newman is, obviously a saint and now doctor of the church. But Manning, I'm finding really interesting, and I'm going to have to read what you've read and read more of him. It's interesting.
Well, what comes out is because most people, especially after the council, people think Newman actually wins it out, right? Especially with this collegiality. But the things of collegiality and synodality, when you take it from what it was originally intended in the early centuries of the church, is nothing like what they're doing now. Even in the slightest bit.
No, it's not.
Not even remotely close to what collegiality meant in the early centuries of the church. But most people do assume that Newman won out, especially now he's being canonized. You probably never see Manning canonized, but Manning is an ultramontanist. Like Manning is pushing for papal infallibility, and Newman's against it. Newman wants.
Well, I think there's a lot of misconception around that.
There's a nuance to that, right?
Yeah, Newman is seen as being against Vatican I, against papal infallibility, but and we'll get into it a little bit deeper. But when Newman reads the final draft of Pastor Aeternus, he accepts it without hesitation, like immediately. I think what when people think he was against it, what he was against was he had a fear that they were going to go way farther with it than they actually did. So I think we'll see.
Yeah, they like you think about like how they actually define papal infallibility. It's like when like it's that the Pope can settle controversy without convening a council, essentially. Like if there's something that comes up, the Pope can speak from the chair and say, Mary is the Immaculate Conception. And the church needs to accept that. And he doesn't need to convene a council to clarify or declare a dogma. It's just saying that Peter, in his unique authority, speaks with that authority. Now, this isn't something new that comes up in Vatican I. This is something that was believed throughout the ages. It's what leads to the conflict between East and West. Like this is not some new thing that they invented Vatican I. It's more like, hey, let's put down on paper and clarify what the church has always believed.
Yep. Yeah. So like when I say that Vatican I declares this or that, like it wasn't invented out of thin air in 1870. They're just they're declaring it to be dogma at that point. But
yeah, it's the same thing with every single thing the church has always done, right? Even with transubstantiation, even with everything, the church always there's something coming up to dispute what the church has always taught, and the church convenes something and either calls a council or the Pope will clarify it.
Yep. Okay, so Manning versus Newman. So the council opens on December 8th, 1869, which is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And there's somewhere between 700 and 750 bishops in the transept of St. Peter's for it. So the fight over papal authority found its two most famous champions, and we already touched on this, but of all places, England, which, like you said, this is shortly after Catholicism's even legalized in England. So it is interesting that the two
like Rob, Manning thought the most pressing issue facing the church in England was alcohol consumption, right? Because Manning is on the ground with
is there a lot of Irish in England at that time?
I don't know. I just know he was involved with all these movements to like get like I think there was like desperation in the like people were, the world is like essentially in chaos and people are turning to drinking, and he's on the ground with the more lower class, where Manning is up in these high echelons of society, and Manning's like, no, I'm telling you, this is what's going on. Like we need to speak to these people about over consuming alcohol,
Well, I mean, if like this is the I don't know. This is the era of things like Oliver Twist. Like England is the cities in England are dirty. Everything's covered in coal dust and smoke and grime. You have not only men and women but children working in factories. I would drink that away too.
You think about like during World War II, like they had like a period where the smog got so bad in the UK, like they couldn't even go outside. People were dying from breathing in the fumes from all these coal factories and things like that. I don't know how much earlier on that goes, but yeah, it's the era.
It was worse in the 1800s than World War II. I'll tell you that.
I'm sure. So it's like the era of industrialization. They're coming up with these coal plants and stuff like that, and there's absolutely no regulation on environmental stuff, and it's just like this cloud of crap covering the entire place. So yeah, you're probably right. People are destitute. People are, you got away from the aristocracy and things like that. Now you're getting into the modern era where people have, there's a middle class being formed and people are falling behind.
Yeah. So Manning and Newman, so they're both converts from Anglicanism. Manning is the Archbishop of Westminster, and he's an aggressive ultramontane. He didn't just think that like papal infallibility was true. He thought the need to declare it was urgent. You know, he sees that the church is under siege from rationalism and liberalism, and he thought that the best course of action was to centralize authority into the Pope, and that was the best way to survive, basically. So he wanted the infallibility defined clearly and defined like right now. John Henry Newman, on the other hand, he did believe in the doctrine as it ended up being declared. He believed the Pope was infallible, but he was what is called an opportunist. So he thought that defining it at that particular moment, in that particular climate, and with that particular faction of ultramontanes in the driver's seat was a disaster waiting to happen. He worried that the ultramontanes would push through a definition that was so broad, so sweeping, and so utterly different from how the popes had actually exercised the authority. Because like he did believe the Pope was infallible. He thought the Pope had this authority, but he thought they were going to push something that was so, like I said, so different from how the popes had usually acted that it would split the church and it would completely alienate the Orthodox forever. It would slam the door on any Anglicans looking to convert.
He was super concerned with ecumenism, like because he's a convert and he comes in. He's very worried, like he's very concerned with ecumenism and like proper ecumenism,
like in the good sense of it.
Yeah.
Yes,
not the nonsense ecumenism you see now, like the proper ecumenism where he really does want to see the unification of East and West, and he wants to see possibility of the Anglican communion reforming its ways and coming back. He sees like the English coming back into union with Rome on the horizon, and the last thing the English want to hear is about papal authority. Like the English it's so ingrained in them. Like you even look at a guy like C.S. Lewis. Like C.S. Lewis had such a Catholic mind, right? Mm-hmm. And he's just so adamant. He's a Church of England guy, like they had this pride about not being papists. The whole idea of the Roman Catholic Church, like we're going to get into that when we get into the definition of the church, right? Like the idea of the Roman Catholic Church comes from it's like an English, the Romanists, the papists, like that. It was an insult meant to Catholics, like, oh, they're the Romans. And it's something they end up.
It was basically a way for them to point to declare that Catholics weren't patriotic in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, loyal to Rome over their own, over the crown. And that's always been the argument since Henry VIII. It's like Henry VIII. Think about what he puts those bishops through. Like those bishops have to take an oath swearing fealty to him over the Pope and stuff. It's a long running thing. So so that's where Newman's concerns are coming from. It's not some liberal thing. He's looking at it from a proper perspective of ecumenism.
Yeah, he's worried that defining infallibility at this point would confuse the faithful. And he wasn't wrong to worry, and I think we see that with the current strain of ultramontanism. But he was wrong about. He was worried about the wrong things with the outcome, because like I said, when the final wording came down for Pastor Aeternus, it was way more moderate than what everyone in Manning's ultramontane faction was pushing for. And when he read the final text, he accepted it right away without hesitation. So now we get into kind of a little bit of the history of the two documents themselves. And then we'll get into why it ended early, and then we'll actually jump into the text.
Well, look, there's only two
documents.
Two documents coming from this council, and then the council gets kind of abruptly stopped, not ended, like not properly ended. It just gets abruptly stopped. But there's some really good stuff in those two documents.
Yeah. So I'll quickly go through a little bit. We'll go through the text of the two documents after all the history. But so the first document comes down April 24th of 1870. and it's Dei Filius, of the Son of God, and it's about faith, reason, revelation. It condemns rationalism, pantheism, materialism, naturalism, basically all the philosophical engines of the modern world. It affirmed that God can be known by reason. It affirms divine revelation is real. Affirms that faith and reason are both gifts from the same creator. And it passed unanimously. And then they turned to the document that everyone had really been waiting for. The one that Manning was pushing for from the beginning, and the one that Newman was begging for them to delay, and that's Pastor Aeternus. So Pastor Aeternus, they gather for the final vote for it on July 18th of 1870. And on July 18th, a thunderstorm breaks over Rome that is so violent that contemporary accounts describe the basilica going completely dark in the middle of the reading of the document. No lights coming in, through the windows. Lightning strikes the dome of St. Peter's Basilica during the reading of Pastor Aeternus.
Wow.
And the bishops could barely hear them reading it over the rain and thunder. Now, when the vote's finally taken, like I said at the beginning of this, 700 to 750 bishops were there. When the vote's finally taken, 533 vote in favor, with only two voting against. Now you'll notice the discrepancy of the math there, right?
Yeah.
That's because now I don't know how many bishops were there when Pastor Aeternus was begun, but the day before the final vote, 60 bishops, most of them being German, Austrian, French, and a few Americans, left the city because they didn't want to vote against it, but they couldn't support it. They did, so they wanted to remain obedient.
And abstentions, basically.
Basically, yeah. So, but even if all 60 have voted against it, you'd have 533 versus about 62. But so Pastor Aeternus passes, and that's the document that says the Pope has full supreme.
We do get into this because this when we get into Pastor Aeternus, man, it's like because the Sedevacantists will use Vatican I to hit you over the head like with a club, and it's like, dude,
I think it's a club against them.
Yes, that's my point. Like, it is so hard to square the Sede position with Vatican I, which is, I just find it funny because the Sedes are the ones who usually, because I've really never read Pastor Aeternus before we decided to get in. It was a couple of weeks before we started this series where I started understanding like just the perpetuity of the Petrine office, things like that are just, man, I don't know how you square that. And even some of the stuff Taylor's been bringing up, right? Like Taylor's been bringing some stuff on X,
bringing up some good arguments.
Yeah. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So Pastor Aeternus, and we'll get into it deeper, but it says the Pope has full, supreme, immediate jurisdiction over the Church, and that when he speaks ex cathedra, in other words, in his office as universal pastor, on matter of faith or moral, binding the whole Church, he's preserved from error. So, what the definition doesn't say is it doesn't say the Pope's impeccable, or that every word out of his mouth is infallible. It doesn't say that his personal opinions, his interviews, his off-the-cuff comments, it doesn't say that any of those are protected. So the conditions are very, very narrow and specific, and that can kind of be seen as Newman's victory inside of Manning's victory of having the infallibility declared. Yeah. So in the end, they kind of do both win. Yeah. Gallicanism at this point is dead. Conciliarism, more or less, is dead at this point. The question of where authority lives in the Church is answered. Yeah. So at this point, the Pope's never been more powerful in terms of like dogma and doctrine. But then at that exact same point, or actually the day after, France declares war on Prussia. And this war had been brewing for months, and it's actually the war really is engineered by Otto von Bismarck, who's the Prussian chancellor. And he's actually a really interesting guy to study. He's like the stereotypical manipulative politician but in like I don't know. He manipulates this whole war. He actually gets France to declare war using what is called the Ems dispatch. He basically takes the German the Prussian king, the Prussian emperor, sends him a dispatch telling him of how a French diplomat comes up to him and asks him something and how he responds. And Bismarck edits it down to make it look like a very short, kind of angry interaction on both sides. And that's what he publishes to the press. So you have all the Prussians wanting war because they think the French diplomat snubbed their king. You have the French wanting war because the Prussian king snubs the French diplomat, when really it wasn't like that at all.
Yeah.
But it gets France to declare war on Prussia. So it baits Napoleon III into this conflict, and it's a trap. Prussia was ready. Prussia, they were experts in planning and in logistics and in like troop transportation via railways and things like this. They were able to mobilize their entire army before France was able to hardly get anyone gathered. So even though France had better rifles, better field guns, things like this,
artillery, like they're the better equipped army,
right? They have a better technology in many cases. They had more troops, and actually they had better trained troops, whereas Prussia was dealing mostly with conscripts still. Prussia was able to get all their forces to battle way quicker than France. So it's largely considered one of the most catastrophic, unexpected military collapses in European history. So the war is declared on July 19th, but it's basically over by September 1st. So on September 1st, at the Battle of Sedan, the Prussian army encircles Napoleon III. And he surrenders and is captured by Prussia. And within 48 hours, the Second French Empire has collapsed.
So this is interesting because I never knew how the whole so this is how Napoleon is defeated.
Napoleon III.
Oh, Napoleon III. Okay.
Yeah, not Napoleon, but Napoleon III he's the same Napoleon that he's involved with all the revolutions of 1848.
Okay.
So he's been in power quite a bit at this point. But he is like kind of the last of the Bonaparte dynasty, if you will. Yeah. So this quick collapse means one thing for Pius in Rome. The French garrison that had been protecting Rome from the Kingdom of Italy gets recalled back to France, right? So for the first time in 20 years, the Pope has no army protecting the remnants of the Papal States. So the Kingdom of Italy, which had been waiting for this, moved within weeks. So the war between France and Prussia is over September 1st. On September 20th, Italian troops breached the Aurelian walls at a place called Porta Pia. There was some resistance, but it was mostly symbolic. Casualties were minimal. But by nightfall of the 20th, the Italian flag is flying over the Pope's palace, flying over Rome. So for the first time since 756.
When does the Swiss Guard become the Papal Guard?
That's more in the 1500s.
But they're more just like a symbolic role.
Well,
like they're not like the French have to guard the papacy, right? So the Swiss Guard is what, just like an honorary thing.
Well, no, but there's only a few hundred of them, and they're meant to protect the person of the Pope himself.
The person of the Pope, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So Pius had no military forces outside of his personal guard. No.
Yeah, they're like the
Secret Service.
Secret Service, yeah, like the Papal Secret Service. Okay.
Yeah.
Dude, you know what it is? It's like like, I don't know anything. If we weren't doing the series, like, I don't, I never like studied this
Mhm.
period in history. So it's, we're learning about these things as we go. It's super interesting, man.
Yeah. Yeah, the Swiss Guard really gained prominence in I think it's 1527, when Rome is attacked by Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor.
The Holy Roman Emperor. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Which is when the King Henry VIII thing is going on, right? Like, that's
yeah.
that whole period.
Mhm.
So like look, we'd love to believe that the Pope was just standing on on moral grounds why Henry could not divorce Catherine of Aragon. But the truth of the matter is, if he wasn't being held captive by Charles V, who was her cousin or her uncle, one of the two, like,
Well, he wasn't held captive because the attack by Charles V is years after, like a few years after. But
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, the worry was that he didn't want to piss off Charles V.
Charles
for
V,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, because the Pope had granted annulments, like, it was something only the Pope could do during this
Mhm.
period, is the Pope could grant an annulment. And you think to yourself, you're like, man, if he would have just granted that annulment, we would have never lost England and stuff. But no, there was so much. That's why we really do need to go back. We definitely need to go back, and we need to jump into the Tudors.
I think we need to finish off like this.
Yeah. Well, no, we're going to finish this up to the
But yeah,
council.
I think we need to continue church history in general.
I want to do church history. I want to stick with this history series, man. Like, I think we should just once a week stick with it. And maybe we will jump to the Reformation after this era is done. And then I want to do early church stuff, man. I want to go back and study Julian the Apostate when he tries to rebuild the temple. And maybe we'll do the thing, like you said, there's not much. We're not going to have papal encyclicals to read. You might have papal bulls. There might be stuff like that during that period, but we're not going to have this segment. Like, we just did 50 minutes on history, but Rob, we only need to do a history segment. Like, we're about to jump in. Before we do Pastor Aeternus, though, Rob, I think we should do the decrees.
Well, so
which one do you want to handle first?
I mean, I was just going to go through the documents like we've been doing with the encyclicals. Thank you, Molly.
Okay, so, but even in the introduction to the decrees, though.
Oh yeah, for sure. But before we do that, just to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So September 20th, Rome's captured. Pius refuses to surrender. He calls himself the prisoner of the Vatican. Every pope after him for 59 years would be a prisoner of the Vatican, basically. October 20th of 1870, he issues a bull, post quam die munere, which indefinitely suspends Vatican I. It's never reconvened. The remaining schemata, which includes a planned document on the role of bishops, which would have potentially balanced the definition of papal authority, the remaining schemata were never voted upon. The council is only formally closed de jure in 1960 by John the 23rd, right before Vatican II.
Yeah.
So,
on like the eve of the council. To this real quick, Rob also set up donate button on the website, because look, we have 300 people in here right now, 225 people in here right now.
Like half of what we
like, come on, these look, the those of you who are watching this, like, you guys are hardcore and you want to actually learn some stuff. These shows don't do that well, so if you guys want to help, because I mean, we're spending Rob is doing a lot of freaking work on these. He sends me a historical summary to read. He sends me the documents, and then I wrote a
7-page script basically for this.
Yeah, and then I try to do as much outside research to try to have little tidbits to add into Rob. I mean, Rob's giving the bulk of the show here, and then I try to just have some tidbits of information that might be interesting and stuff. I guess before we close out, after we do these, we'll go through the
So what Anthony's trying to say is, if you can donate, and it's not really a donation, right? We're not a nonprofit, but if you can tip us a little,
it's a tip jar. Yeah, it's a tip jar.
Go to avoidingbabylon.com, and there on the front page, there'll be an area where you can tip us or scan the QR code in the corner right now.
Yeah. So, okay. So like right from the introduction of the decrees, you see,
Let me pull it up here.
There, where they were talking about Trent, I should have freaking highlighted it.
Here, let me just get my device on. So the introduction here.
Yeah, the introduction, like they were talking about Trent and calling Trent like this, the holy council of Trent. They're like, I'm trying to.
Well, you're not talking about the introduction at the very top. You're talking about the first session.
Yeah, I think it's at the first session. Let me see. Okay, so yeah, here it is. Okay. Now this redemptive providence appears very clearly in unnumbered benefits, but most especially it is manifested in the advantages which have been secured for the Christian world by ecumenical councils, among which the Council of Trent requires special mention, celebrated though it was in evil days. Like there's so much about Trent, and that's session 3, but
I was going to say you I have a lot highlighted in the 2 sessions before that.
Go. All right. I have my main highlighting is in session 2 and session 3.
Okay. Well, so I highlighted just the beginning decree of opening of the council, just from the way it speaks, like why they're doing this, and it says, Pius, bishop, servant of the servants of God, with the approval of the sacred council for the everlasting record. Most reverend fathers, is it your pleasure that to the praise and glory of the holy and undivided Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, for the increase and exaltation of the Catholic faith and religion, for the uprooting of current errors, for the reformation of the clergy and the Christian people, and for the common peace and concord of all, the Holy Ecumenical Vatican Council should be open and be declared to have been opened? And they all reply, yes. I mean, I haven't read like
just the reality of it, right?
Of the decrees of Vatican II. Like I've read Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate, but like I haven't read the opening. But I imagine the opening of Vatican II isn't like that.
No, definitely not. It's just such a different time period, man. It's so different. It's like, man, all right. So, I mean, I have stuff in session 2. Do you have anything in session 1 that you want to get to?
Nothing else in session 1.
All right. So, session 2, there's a bunch of stuff that all of us would obviously know. And you like obviously
kind of goes
affirm,
through a creed,
right?
basically.
Yeah, it kind of goes through the creed, right? But then in Article 9, I guess it would be Article 9 or something. It's like, I firmly hold that purgatory exists and that souls are detained there are helped by and the souls detained there are helped by the suffrages of the faithful. Likewise, that the saints reigning with Christ are to be honored and prayed to, and that they offer prayers to God on our behalf, and that their relics should be venerated. I resolutely assert that images of Christ, the ever Virgin Mary, Mother of God, and likewise those of other saints are to be kept and retained, and that due honor and reverence is to be shown for them. I affirm that the power of indulgences was left by Christ in the church, and that their use is eminently beneficial to the Christian people. First off, the sacred images. We are so desensitized to sacred images, especially you go to a funeral, they hand you a holy card, you go everywhere you go, there's just this like barrage of sacred images. But before the printing press, especially, sacred images were something that were sacred, right? And I mean, I've had holy cards from funerals that, you know, they kind of just get thrown in a desk drawer or something like that. Like, we're not supposed to treat sacred images like they're just any image. And there's even ways to dispose of sacred things if you don't have use for them anymore. You're not supposed to just throw sacred images in the garbage. And our desensitization to sacred images has led to the profanation of pornographic image, right? Like being desensitized to the sacred has led to the profane and people thinking nothing of images. And I did even just like I affirm the power of indulgences was left by Christ in the church. And the church today treats indulgences kind of like, oh, this goofy thing, like, all right, go, we'll give you an indulgence if you do this thing. But indulgences were a very serious thing, and especially because they were so contested in the Reformation.
Yeah.
In session 3, I had something.
Well,
I don't know if you want to.
So I actually have the rest of session 2 highlighted. It's not too much. It says, so it's starting at 13. I acknowledge the Holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman.
Yes,
Church,
I should have had that highlighted.
The
100%.
mother and mistress of all the churches. And I think that's, I mean, those of us who are Latin Catholics, I think we kind of take that for granted. But especially the Eastern churches, right? I think they almost pride themselves on not being Roman, but no, they are Roman.
But they are Roman,
They
right?
are
like
Roman.
especially look, the clip we played at the beginning of the show, that the empire moves to the east, right? Like Constantine moves the empire to Constantinople. That's why it's called Constantinople. Constantine moves it to the east. So even the Eastern churches are Roman, right?
Well,
so
even without that, they are all under Rome.
Yeah, like but there's something about that Danielic image of the two legs being east and west. And Dr. Alan Phimister gets into that book in The Iron Scepter of the Son of Man. So if you guys know, somebody was asking about good books to read. It's not really about this time period, but The Iron Scepter of the Son of Man by Dr. Alan Phimister is a phenomenal book. If you want to understand, it's so good, man. There's so much in that. But this decree right here, right? I acknowledge the Holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church. So the phrase apostolic was added in because there's this insult from the English specifically about, the Roman Church that we were talking about earlier. But there's something so important about understanding we are the Roman Church, but also the Apostolic Church, because the Anglican Communion is claiming that they're really the Roman Church because they have, it's that the branch theory that they have or whatever, right? And that's what Calvin Robinson was trying to claim his apostolic ministry was from this branch theory and stuff like that. I don't want to knock Calvin Robinson or anything. I'm just saying it's an improper way to see it, but this is the Holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church.
At a Roman comment.
But not just that, Rob, the church and mother and mistress of all the churches actually, because look, the big debate that I've been seeing in the last couple of days, especially from guys like Stephen Cox and others, against what Taylor Marshall was saying, because look, the Sede position is essentially that Vatican II instituted a new religion. And Stephen Cox said, how can it not be a new, because I said, look, there. Oh man, I actually have to find the tweet because
I know what one I commented on it.
Yeah, you did, and I said, okay, I actually found it. Okay, so all right, so Stephen Cox said the back cover of Taylor Marshall's book Infiltration in 2019 verse with what he said on X today, and it says in the mid-19th century, this is Taylor's book. In the mid-19th century, clandestine societies populated by modernists and Marxists hatched a plan to subvert the church from within, their goal to change her doctrine, her liturgy, her mission. And then Stephen said, Vatican II does not teach a new religion. I said, they clearly did hatch a plot to subvert the church. They succeeded in many areas. This does not mean they succeeded in starting a new religion, nor does it mean the See of Peter is vacant or occupied by an anti-pope. And then Stephen said, how can the same religion have a different ecclesiology? Because ecclesiology is not the religion, right? And the church,
there was two ecclesiologies before Vatican I.
Well, this is what I'm saying, right? So the church and mother and mistress of all the churches kind of insinuates that, like, the Vatican II kind of played on that, where it says the Church of Christ subsists in the Roman Catholic Church, right? Like Vatican I is kind of saying that, right? The Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church is the mother and mistress of all churches, and then Vatican II is saying the Church of Christ subsists in the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, and I'm not saying it's the same thing. And I know the ecclesiology has definitely changed after Vatican II, but I also do not think that constitutes a new religion
Agreed.
by any stretch
Yeah.
of the imagination. And I've had interactions with American Reform. He's definitely watching. He watches these shows.
Yeah, he liked the last one a lot.
Yeah, no, and I love him. I want to actually have a conversation. Maybe I'll have him on with Catholic State or something. But he was saying how religious liberty, I think it was religious liberty, I'm pretty sure. Because I said, what errors does the council teach that could lead you to hell? And he pointed out religious liberty. And I said, no, believing in religious liberty will not lead you to hell. Religious liberty will lead to the downfall of your nation, though.
Yeah.
Right. Like it could lead to a really bad understanding of Christ the King, like understanding the social kingship of Christ, and that could lead to the downfall of your nation. But if you personally believe in religious liberty, you're not going to hell. It's not a mortal sin to believe in religious liberty. So no, the church has not taught anything from the council or beyond that you are required to believe that will lead you to hell. Like, I'm sorry, you will not convince me that the church has taught something in Vatican II that will lead you to hell.
Plus,
I think
plus Vatican II isn't saying that you have to believe the Mormons, or the Mormons have a right to have a temple in Salt Lake City or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're seeing religious liberty in an American context, to be honest. And they're seeing it in, well, everybody should just, God, they're seeing it from the position of God doesn't force himself on you, and every person has to have the freedom to choose, which is in a respect true, right? Like, we don't force conversions, we don't force baptism. Every person has the right to. This is what hell is. Hell is you reject God. So it's a conversation I'd be willing to have with those guys.
And even if, I mean, there is a reason why Lefebvre was able to
sign the documents of Vatican II.
to vote on, accept, and sign the documents. The problem, there are problems with the documents, but it's more in that the church since then, in the hierarchy of the church especially, hasn't used them to teach what the church has normally taught.
Correct.
But like you said, that doesn't mean that those documents create a new religion. It means we've had a lot of terrible bishops, since
look, I think
Vatican II.
I mean, especially going through this series, you're seeing the evil ideologies that are popping up, and they're working their way into the church, and the Pope and the bishops, the good bishops of this time, are doing everything they can to fight these forces that are outside the church. But as Rob has showed the past 3 episodes, the last 2, we had a very specific priest who was inside the church pushing these things, right? And the things that he's pushing then are eventually, like, you're looking at Bishop Barron, who's now talking to Dave Rubin.
And Barron's now seen as a conservative bishop.
Like, this is how far this ideology
whereas
is.
Lamennais probably would have been crapping himself that a bishop was talking with a homosexual.
Like, we wish for a Lamennais right now, right?
Right.
Like, that guy would be a rad trad. Are you kidding me?
I did have the next part highlighted, especially because you had mentioned Trent. So right after it says Mother and Mistress of all churches, it says, likewise, all other things which has been transmitted, defined, and declared by the sacred canons and the ecumenical councils, especially the sacred Trent, I accept unhesitatingly and profess in the same way. Of course, my Kindle just went to sleep.
Whatever is to the contrary, and whatever heresies have been condemned, rejected, anathematized by the church, I too condemn, reject, and anathematize. But, like, Trent is really seen as like the pinnacle of Catholicism, right?
I don't want to say like a super council, right? Because
but it kind of is. It's like the pinnacle of the Catholic faith when you get to Trent, right? Trent hammers out justification in such clarity, and all of the Protestant heresies that popped up, Trent really does find they clarify every single one, and they give everybody the tools, the apologetic tools to combat the Protestant heresies, which then leads to what's his name? Oh man, Saint. Oh man, what the heck? Who writes
Which one?
against Protestantism so well?
Well, you have Francis de Sales.
Francis de Sales, like Saint Francis de Sales is coming right in that period, and you have the apologetic tools necessary to combat the
Well,
Protestant errors.
Yeah, right. Which I
from
mean,
Trent.
up until the Enlightenment, the church, the so-called Counter-Reformation, which began before the actual Reformation, but the church, using Trent, using orders like the Jesuits,
Jesuits, yeah.
they'd almost converted all of Europe back to
Yeah.
Catholicism.
Yeah, they stopped the Protestant Reformation in its tracks,
Right,
because
I mean-
it was progressing everywhere.
Yeah, France at one point had 500,000. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation. Huguenots,
Yeah,
Huguenots, whatever you want to call
it
them.
was Huguenots, but yeah, I would
Um,
say Huguenots too.
But by before the Enlightenment begins, they have a couple thousand at most.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're fighting Jansenism during this time and
Yeah,
everything. It's
yeah.
kind of crazy what's going on in France, like especially when you're coming up to like the French Revolution and stuff. There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff happening over in France. So, in session 3, the dogmatic constitution on the Catholic faith, Pius, bishop, servant of the servants of God, with approval of the Sacred Council for an everlasting record. So the Son of God,
So
Redeemer.
this
of
is
the human-
Deus Filius. Just
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
yeah. So its title is Dogmatic Constitution of Catholic Faith, but it takes its other title from the Son of God. So Deus Filius.
So the Son of God, Redeemer of the human race, our Lord Jesus Christ, promised when about to return to his heavenly Father that he would be with his church militant upon earth all days, even to the end of the world. Hence, never at any time has he ceased to stand by his beloved bride, assisting her when she teaches, blessing her in her labors, and bringing her help when she is in danger. Now, this redemptive providence appears very clearly in unnumbered benefits, but most especially is it manifested in the advantages which have been secured for the Christian world by ecumenical councils, among which the Council of Trent requires special mention. Celebrated though it was in evil days.
Yeah.
That is something very important, right? That Christ promises to be with his church until the end of days. Like, even in the tumultuous time we are in right now, I've talked about this before, about the importance of Eucharistic miracles, even in the Novus Ordo, right? Because Eucharistic miracles tend to happen when there's an issue of unbelief, right? Like, they tend to happen when a priest maybe doubts whether his consecration is really transforming the body and blood, transforming it into the body and blood of Christ. I think that Eucharistic miracles in the Novus Ordo are for trads who are questioning the craziness in the church right now. You can still
definitely helped me
too, man. Like, you can rest with confidence that Christ is still truly present with his church in the current priesthood, in the current liturgy, with all the changes that came from the council. We still have Eucharistic miracles. You still have Saint Wilhelmina, whose incorruptible body, she was a Novus Ordo nun. Like, you still have Christ truly present with his church, because he promised us the Holy Spirit will be with us until the end. So, like, that's another thing that this whole council really just, I mean, the Sedes have some really good, like, theories and theses and things like that, but that's all they are, is theories and they're trying to make sense of the crisis as well. I can't go along with where they go with it.
And we'll get later in the documents, it talks especially about miracles. So I'll make sure to bring that up. Do you have anything highlighted before number 5 here in Deus Filius?
I have all of 5 highlighted.
So I have 4 through at least 10 all highlighted, but
we may as well just go through it.
I mean,
man, we're at 1 hour and 15 already, though.
Yeah, let's do 5 because of Trent. So yeah, you say 5.
Okay. Everybody knows that those heresies condemned by the fathers of Trent, like I'm telling you, Trent is so important.
Yes.
Those heresies condemned by the fathers of Trent, which rejected the divine magisterium of the church and allowed religious questions to be a matter for the judgment of each individual, have gradually collapsed into a multiplicity of sects, either at variance or in agreement with one another. And by this means, a good many people have had all faith in Christ destroyed. Indeed, even the Holy Bible itself, which they at one time claimed to be the sole source and judge of the Christian faith, is no longer held to even be divine, but they begin to assimilate it to the inventions of myth.
Man, those two paragraphs destroy
Right there, just talking
Protestantism.
about this is why Protestantism has devolved into 40,000 different sects.
You guys believe that only the Bible was to be the sole source of faith, and yet but all that did was leave it to you guys to believe it was myth.
and to leave it to the individuals, like all of that's what's crazy. Like all of this stuff that we've been talking about these past 2 episodes, every single one of these things find their origin in the Protestant Reformation. Every single one of them. There's not a single one that doesn't start with Luther going, "Here I stand," whatever the hell he says over there. I can go no more, or whatever, and nailing his 95 theses to the wall. It's all him just going, "I reject your authority," and that's it. It's all it comes down to. Thereupon there came into being and spread far and wide throughout the world that doctrine of rationalism and naturalism, utterly opposed to the Christian religion, since this is of supernatural origin, which spares no effort to bring it about that Christ, who alone is our Lord and Savior, is shut out from the minds of people and the moral life of nations. This is, getting to the social kingship of Christ. Thus, they would establish what they call the rule of simple reason or nature, the abandonment and rejection of the Christian religion and the denial of God and his Christ has plunged the minds of many into the abyss of pantheism, materialism, and atheism. And the consequence is that they strive to destroy rational nature itself, to deny any criterion of what is right and just, and to overthrow the very foundations of human society. Everything we're seeing in our world today comes down to this. Like even the stuff with AI, none of them even consider, is this good for humanity? Is this good? The things they're playing with in biology right now, playing around with genetics and all these different things, none of them recognize Christ as king. None of them think they have to submit themselves to the social kingship of Christ.
Even surrogacy isn't about what's best for the child. It's what's best for... Yeah,
it's witchcraft. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I was just saying, like surrogacy, the bringing about of a child through a natural means, isn't about what's best for the child. It's about what do I want?
Yeah, you know? It turns a child into a commodity. It's something. Well, oh man, dude, I went down a rabbit hole today on. Whatever, we'll do that on the other side. All right. With this impiety spreading in every direction, it has come about, alas, that many, even among the children of the Catholic Church, have strayed from the path of genuine piety. And as the truth was gradually diluted in them, their Catholic sensibility was weakened, led away by diverse and strange teachings and confusing nature and grace, human knowledge, and the divine faith. Man, this whole council, we got to get to Pastor Aeternus, though, Rob.
I know.
We have to.
Hold on. Let me see here.
Like there's so much we could do a whole show just going through this.
Yeah, we could. I just want to see if there's anything really good left here in Dei Filius I want to do. Okay, so hold on. Yeah, there's a couple things, but so at the end of chapter 2 in Dei Filius in number 8, it says, since the decree on the interpretation of Holy Scripture, profitably made by the Council of Trent, with the intention of constraining rash speculation, has been wrongly interpreted by some, we renew that decree and declare its meaning to be as follows: that in matters of faith and morals, belonging as they do to the establishing of Christian doctrine, that meaning of Holy Scripture must be held to be true, or must be held to be the true one, which Holy Mother Church held and holds, since it is her right to judge of the true meaning interpretation of Holy Scripture, In consequence, it is not permissible for anyone to interpret Holy Scripture in a sense contrary to this, or indeed against the unanimous consent of the fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got to get to Pastor Aeternus.
Hold on. In chapter 3, there's something about miracles. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Fine.
So, number 4 in chapter 3. In order that the submission of our faith should be in accordance with reason, it was God's will that there should be linked to the internal assistance of the Holy Spirit external indications of his revelation. That is to say, divine acts, and first and foremost, miracles and prophecies, which clearly demonstrating as they do the omnipotence and infinite knowledge of God, are the most certain signs of revelation and are suited to the understanding of all.
That's an important thing to understand. So if Martin Luther was correct, grand miracles would have accompanied him. If the Sedevacantists were correct,
yes,
grand miracles would accompany them. So yes, there would be Eucharistic miracles, and they'll say, well, no, there's no lack of faith, but there is on my part. I lack faith in it. So
yes.
To get someone like me because the thing that is keeping me united to the Bishop of Rome and the bishops, even though I see some of the wicked things they're doing, is the miracles that accompany them, because God always does provide proof of his existence, and miracles have always accompanied the church.
I mean, as much as I rag on Carlo Acutis, the Novus Ordo is able to produce a 16-year-old that has a couple of miracles attributed to him. Why can't the Sedes? Unless, of course, they have nothing to do with the Holy Catholic Church.
Well, I say all the time, if you want to prove Sedevacantism to me, show me your saints. Like that is, show me your saints, and I don't even mean like some great miracles and stuff. Like show me the holy ones. Like I'll say.
And later, I forget if it's in Dei Filius or Pastor Aeternus, but it talks about indications of the church, and I'll tell you right now, the Sedes I know meet none of them, so we'll get to that, but.
So all right, so now Pastor Aeternus.
Actually it isn't Dei Filius. Hold on. I know we need to get to Pastor Aeternus, but number 12, the church herself by reason of her astonishing propagation, her outstanding holiness, and her inexhaustible fertility in every kind of goodness, by her Catholic unity and her unconquerable stability, is a kind of great and perpetual motive of credibility and incontrovertible evidence of her own divine mission. So in other words, to have incontrovertible evidence of your own divine mission, you need propagation, holiness, goodness, unity, stability. I don't think the Sedes have any of those.
Any of that. No, and look, that kind of goes to that quote. It's like any institution run by such imbecilic whatever. It could never last 2,000 years. Like that in itself, that it's run by such imbecilic buffoons and wicked men, and the thing's still standing after 2,000 years. That in itself is an apologetic. Like that is in itself a miracle and a proof of the reality of divine assistance, especially since all the craziness since the council.
I think that's everything.
Not only do they not have unity and stability, what's crazy is they'll talk about the changing of the ecclesiology of Vatican II, and it's like, what is the setting ecclesiology? Like, do you know how
it depends on which setting you talk about,
dude? The setting ecclesiology is, I'm home by myself. There's no bishops left. Like, what are you talking about? There's some of them don't even believe anybody has valid orders.
And part of Pastor Aeternus kind of actually addresses that, if I remember right.
Yeah, all right, we have to get to this. So, all right, Pastor Aeternus. Now, look all right. So, chapter 1 is on the institution of the apostolic primacy of Peter. We all understand that one. But chapter 2 on the permanence of the primacy of blessed Peter in the Roman pontiffs. Okay, this is an important one. That which our Lord Jesus Christ, the Prince of Shepherds and great shepherd of the sheep, established in the blessed apostle Peter for the continual salvation and permanent benefit of the church, must of necessity remain forever. by Christ's authority in the church, which founded as it is upon a rock, will stand firm until the end of time.
Wait, where? Okay, yep, I see where you're at. Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
get
I said,
around that?
I wrote in my notes here that, I mean, that's opposed to all the Home Aloners,
Yeah.
right? That there should be shepherds and teachers until the end of time.
Yeah, pastors and shepherds. Okay, so for no one can be in doubt. Indeed, it was known in every age that the holy and most blessed Peter, prince and head of the apostles, the pillar of faith and the foundation of the Catholic Church, received the keys of the kingdom from our Lord Jesus Christ, the Savior and Redeemer of the human race, and that to this day and forever he lives and presides and exercises judgment in his successors, the bishops of the Holy Roman See, which he founded and consecrated with his blood. Therefore, whoever succeeds to the chair of Peter obtains by the institution of Christ himself the primacy of Peter over the whole church, so what the truth has ordained stands firm, and blessed Peter perseveres in the rock-like strength he was granted and does not abandon that guidance of the church which he once received. For this reason, it has always been necessary for every church, that is to say, the faithful throughout the world, to be in agreement with the Roman Church because of its preeminent authority, in consequence of being joined as members to the head with that see, from which the rites of sacred communion flow to all. They will grow together into the structure of a single body. Look, the thing is,
where are you right now?
I mean, I'm reading Pastor Aeternus off the Vatican website.
Okay, but what part?
That was chapter 2, paragraph 4.
Okay, perfect.
Look, this is oh man, I just lost my train of thought. Shoot.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I mean, so within chapter 2 there, I mean, it says blessed Peter perseveres in the rock-like strength he was granted and does not abandon that guidance of the church which he once received. I mean, how do sedes not dishonor Saint Peter?
Yeah, and
right?
this is where I was.
They're claiming he's no longer.
So okay, so there are
that he has abandoned.
There, man, you know what it is? There's a few different sede positions, so I don't want to just kind of lump them all together.
Well, they're like Protestants in that regard, right?
Yeah, there's a sede position where it holds that, like, Leo is the. I don't know, like dude, you want to know what it's kind of wild. It's kind of like Benedict trying to divide. It's kind of like this. It's like Benedict trying to divide the ministerium from the mysterium, like whatever.
Mm.
Like that's actually how some sedes see it. It's like, well, he holds he holds the office of Peter, but not the ministry of Peter. That's actually, it's kind of wild. Like that is the sede position, that the way Benedict saw it. Like Benedict kind of implied that there was a ministry of Peter and an office of Peter, and he tried to separate the two, and that's kind of one of the sede positions. But it's all conspiracy stuff, and I just can't get on board with it. But this is also the reason St. Catherine of Siena, like people always bring up how St. Catherine went up against the Pope. It's like she went up against the Pope during the Avignon papacy.
And she did it in private letters.
She did it in private letters, but it's also because she sees the Bishop of Rome leaving the Roman See as a major problem, right? And this is what Cardinal Manning is getting at also. And Cardinal Manning saying, if the Bishop of Rome leaves the Roman See and if the Bishop of Rome is not in the city of Rome, that is what will give rise to the Antichrist. Manning is not saying there will be no Pope. He's saying if the Bishop of Rome is removed from Rome, that is what will give rise to the Antichrist. And that's kind of Cardinal Manning's whole thesis in the present crisis of the Holy See, which I still think, like, while you're on this trip, if you're sitting poolside one day or something, you could get that down in like 2-3 hours. So,
okay.
Like all the other stuff in Pastor Aeternus is kind of like.
Did you read number 5 there of chapter 2? Therefore, if anyone says that it is not by the institution of Christ, the Lord himself, that blessed Peter should have perpetual successors, in the
Yes.
primacy over the whole church, or that the Roman pontiff is not the successor of Blessed Peter, and this primacy let him be anathema. Like
Yes.
the number of times that Pastor Aeternus says permanent, perpetual. Like I know sedes will claim like, well, it's just a long sedevacante period, or like that an anathema doesn't say that, it doesn't apply during like the sedevacante of a normal pope. This is just, there's nothing saying a sedevacante can't be this long, but it's like after a certain time, the nature of a sedevacante period does change with time, right? Like a 70-year sedevacante period is not the same as the 2-year, 9-month longest sedevacante period on record, just by its very nature. Taylor Marshall pointed out, like,
Yeah.
like it at that point we're almost at 2 generations.
2 generations, and they're not just saying the chair of Peter is vacant. Their claim is that all ordinate, like they changed the look. Here's the thing: their claim is that all ordinations since that council are invalid. Like they changed the formulation,
or even if that's not, then since the Novus Ordo, yes,
like the Novus Ordo, they changed the formulation. Now, here's the thing: the church has the authority to change the formula. The formula has not been, it's not like up until like if you go to the 2nd, 3rd century. Now, look, I understand that is what do they call that? Antiquating or something like that, whatever. It's like antiquarianism. Like they will claim like, oh, we're receiving in the hymn because that's what they did in the early centuries of the church. The thing is, they actually did do that in the early centuries of the church. It was before the church.
Some places.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, that was before the church like started to deeply understand like what they were doing. Like the things the church develops over time, they did for a reason. So, but the church still does have the authority to change the disciplines and the formulations of things. That's what, like, part of what Trent is doing is saying, okay, this is valid in the Mass, this isn't valid in the Mass. Like the church, and especially under the chair of Peter, they have the authority to change the formulation. So yeah, we may not like that they changed the way the sacraments are performed, but the church does have the authority to change those things. And I do wish they still did the exorcisms when they do baptism. And I still like,
there's a reason I drive 4 hours for that.
Yeah. And I do wish that the church still did those things, but the fact that they changed those things does not mean those things are invalid at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now look, this is the thing is there were years where we were doing this show, especially early on in this show, where there was like this, like, oh, don't talk to the sedevacantists, man. They'll rope you into a corner. But like the more I study these arguments, like I'm watching Stephen Cox and I'm watching these guys and I'm watching their arguments. Their arguments aren't convincing. No. And I like these guys. This isn't a knock to Stephen Cox.
I don't like them, but
I know you don't, but I do.
I know you do.
It's not a knock to these guys. Like I like Kevin Davis. I like Mario. I like all these guys. I think we're all dealing with a crisis, and I think they're coming to a different conclusion than me. But I listen to the arguments, and I don't find them convincing. And it's not because I haven't studied them. Like I'm watching them argue. I'm watching them argue with Taylor, and I'm saying Taylor's argument is more convincing than theirs.
Way more so.
Way more.
Right, and like so I've been listening to some Joe Heschmeyer over the past week or so, and he actually had he had a good point, and he wasn't talking about the sedevacantists, but it applies very much so to discussions with them. He was saying how when Christ was in conversations with the Pharisees, right? If you notice, Christ didn't argue theology with the Pharisees, right? He didn't respond to their arguments. He performed a miracle.
Yeah.
Right. He was saying, it doesn't matter what you think or say. I'm the Son of God, and here's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's almost like that with
they're arguing theology. They're like the Pharisees are going, you can't do this on the Sabbath, and Jesus is like, see his withered hand.
I'm God. Here you go.
Yeah. Like, see his withered hand. Don't tell me what I could do on the Sabbath.
To a certain extent, we don't need to argue all the individual points the set of conscience bring up.
It's the book of Job.
If you are the church of God, where are your miracles?
It's the book of Job, Rob. Like, you go to the book of Job, all his friends are arguing correct theology, and Job's just like, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And that's kind of what with the mess we're in today. It's I'm just like, I see that Christ is still with his church, and I stay with his church. I don't know. And I see every time people break away, I am too tan for this stream. I was cooking in the sun all weekend.
I'm going to come back so sunburnt from Florida.
Yeah,
I will look like
so. You better put
I
some
will look
oil
like
on,
a
bud.
lobster we used to sell.
All right, so we're gonna wrap this at 1:35, and we're gonna go over to locals, because Rob does have to get packing and stuff, but I want to give you guys some good stuff on locals. So we're going to head over there. To all of you, if you enjoy this, please like, subscribe, share these shows, guys. Like, that's actually the best thing you could do. Share these shows, because we got to beat the algorithm.
Second best thing to do is to scan this and go to avoidingbabylon.com and donate money.
Throw a tip, but yeah, sharing the show. If you can't afford to throw us a tip, share the show with people. Tell people it's it's a fun way. You sound like my wife, and the thing is,
I think she's telling me.
My wife will tell me to put sunscreen on, and I'm so stubborn. I'm like, who do you think you're telling what to do? Do not tell me what to do. And then
it makes me less likely to do it.
Just don't tell me what to do. I don't like it. Just don't tell me what to do. All right, so we're gonna go over to locals. We got a couple things over there. I'm not going to take Christopher West's side. That's not what I'm going to do. But I want to get into the Wagner video today. I want to talk about Chud the Builder and the DOJ. Those are the three topics for locals. But we're gonna do the Wagner stuff first, because it's like, man, you guys. I'm like, every time I watch these young guys talking about like sex on X, I'm just like, thank God I married my high school sweetheart. Like, I'm so glad I never had to deal with the dating world. Like, oh my gosh, man. If I ever had to do dating apps and stuff, I don't know what I would do. Thank goodness.
If my wife were to die, I would hire some sort of nanny for the kids until they were all grown, and then I would become a monk.
Yeah, save it for locals. We'll talk about that. What would we do if our wives died?
There is no way this can go wrong for us. None.
What would I do if my wife died? Oh man. All right, we're gonna go over to locals, guys. Join us over there. Yeah, share the show. Tell everybody how fun it is over here. And we'll see you guys on the other side.